Namaste. In continuation with the circulatory system that we were dealing with, today we are going to study about the structure of the human heart. Before we go on to the structure per se, let us recall a few basic points related to this. If we look at the location, where is the human heart located? The human heart is located in the thoracic cavity. It is located in the thoracic cavity above the diaphragm. It is located in the thoracic cavity above the diaphragm that separates the thorax and the abdomen. We all know that the diaphragm is a muscular sheath that separates the thorax and the abdomen. And it is located in between the two lungs, the space between the two lungs, which is called as mediastinum. Then, what is its? The muscles that go to make up the heart, they are the cardiac muscles that go to make up the heart. So we have already defined, or we have already seen that the heart is a muscular pumping organ. It is located in the thoracic cavity above the diaphragm between the two lungs in the space which is referred to as the mediastinum. Now, how is the heart protected? So, the protection from the heart comes from this structure which is called as the pericardium. So, what is the pericardium? The pericardium is a double-layered structure. It is a double-layered structure that covers the heart. And in between the two layers of the pericardium, there is a fluid that is called as the pericardial fluid. Now, what is the function of the pericardium? The pericardium serves to protect the heart, and the pericardial fluid that is present between the two layers of the pericardium acts as a shock absorber and helps to reduce the friction that is caused when the heart is beating. So, the heart is very well protected not only by the pericardium, but because of its location in the thoracic cavity, it is also very well protected by the rib cage. So, these are the few important points that we need to remember when we take into consideration the external structure of the heart, namely its location, what it's made of, and how it is protected. We will now move on to see in detail about the internal structure of the heart. As we have already seen, the heart is a four-chambered structure. Now, in order to understand this better, let us diagrammatically try to represent and get a basic understanding of the structure of the heart. So, this is only a diagrammatic representation, my dear children, which will help us to understand better the structure of the heart. Right. This may not be to scale, but let us first get the idea clear. Now, the two upper chambers of the heart are called as auricles, or they are also called as atria. Now, these upper chambers are designated as right auricle and left auricle, which I have indicated with RA and LA. Right? The lower chambers of the heart are called as ventricles. And just as how we have two auricles, there are two ventricles. The corresponding ventricles will be right ventricle and left ventricle. So these are the four chambers of the heart, but let us know a little more about this. Now, the auricles or the atria are the upper chambers of the heart and they are also referred to as the receiving chambers or the collecting chambers. The lower chambers of the heart, on the other hand, are referred to as the ventricles, and they are the ones which will be pushing the blood or dispersing the blood out of the heart. So, the auricles usually are thin-walled chambers, right? Because they will be pushing the blood into their corresponding ventricles. The ventricles, on the other hand, are thick-walled chambers because they have to push the blood away from the heart, which we'll be seeing in a little while. So, auricles are the upper chambers, ventricles are the lower chambers. These are the receiving chambers, the ventricles are the distributing chambers. The auricles are thin-walled, the ventricles are thick-walled. Now, the two auricles are separated by means of a septum here, which is referred to as the interauricular septum. And the ventricles in turn are separated by the interventricular septum. The auricles are separated by the interauricular septum. The ventricles are separated by the interventricular septum. And here too we have the auriculoventricular septum. Now, these septa are very, very useful because they clearly separate the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood. The presence of the interauricular and ventricular septum ensures that the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood do not mix. This is very, very important in organisms, the higher organisms like the birds and the mammals, because there is a constant demand for energy in order to keep the body temperature constant. You know that humans and birds are homeothermic, they have a constant body temperature to maintain. So, these septum do not allow the mixing of the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood, thereby ensuring an efficient supply of oxygen to the demand that is put forth by the body. So, these are the two septum, and you can also see that the auricles are separated from the ventricles by means of the auriculoventricular septum. Now, does this mean that the heart is made up of 4 separate chambers with no interconnection? Certainly not. Now, bringing about a connectivity between the two chambers are the valves. So, now we are going to have a look at what are the valves that are present in the heart. The 4 chambers of the heart are not completely isolated from each other. The auricle and the ventricle of the same side remain connected by means of these openings. Now let us focus our attention on the right side of the heart. The right auricle opens into the right ventricle by means of a small opening here, which is guarded by a valve that consists of 3 flaps and is referred to as the tricuspid valve. Now, why is a tricuspid valve so called? It is called tricuspid because there are 3 flaps that are present in the valve. And what is the function of this valve? This valve ensures that the blood always flows from the auricle into the ventricle. So the blood flow is always from the right auricle into the right ventricle. These valves will never allow the blood to flow backwards. So we can say that these are unidirectional valves, ensuring that the blood is pushed from the right auricle into its corresponding right ventricle. Now, holding these flaps in place are thread-like structures that are called as chordae tendineae. the chordae tendineae are connected to small muscles which are called as papillary muscles. Now the chordae tendineae and papillary muscles ensure that the valves do not open in the opposite direction, thereby ensuring that the blood flow is always from the auricle into ventricle. So the chordae tendineae are thin fibers which are connected to the papillary muscle, and they ensure that when the valve closes, it perfectly closes without allowing the blood to go back into the auricle. So the tricuspid valve is present guarding the opening between the right auricle into the right ventricle. Now, if you look at the left side of the heart, there is another valve here which guards the opening from the left auricle into the left ventricle. This is called as bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. The bicuspid valve or mitral valve. Why? Simply because it is made up of two flaps instead of three. Here it is called tricuspid because of the three flaps. Here it is called bicuspid because it has got two flaps. Now, just like the tricuspid, the bicuspid also ensures that the blood is always moving from the left auricle into the left ventricle. So these are unidirectional valves which will allow the flow or the movement of blood from the left auricle into the left ventricle. So these valves are there in place to make sure that this is the direction in which the blood flows. Now, one small tip for you to remember. Children then generally get confused as to the location of the tricuspid and bicuspid. So how do I remember it? There is an R that comes up in the tricuspid. So the tricuspid is present in the right side of the heart. There is an R is that. So if the tricuspid is going to come on the right side, automatically it is understood that the bicuspid will be present between the left auricle and the left ventricle. So these are the two valves present in the heart, but they are not the only two. There are two more, which we will see in the next part when we deal with the blood vessels connected to the heart. So the two valves, tricuspid and bicuspid, ensure that the blood is moving from the auricle into the corresponding ventricle. So now we are going to look into the blood vessels that are connected to the heart. We have already seen that in our body there are three types of blood vessels. To quickly recap, the arteries and the veins, the capillaries. The arteries, as we have already seen, they are the blood vessels that carry the blood away from the heart. They always carry oxygenated blood with the exception of the pulmonary artery, and they usually have thick elastic walls because they are carrying blood under higher pressure. The veins, on the other hand, are the blood vessels that bring the blood back to the heart. They are usually carrying deoxygenated blood with the exception of the pulmonary vein, and usually they are thin walled, which are distensible because they are carrying blood under low pressure. Right. Now, let us see what are the various blood vessels that are connected to the heart. I have divided my board into two parts, referring to the right side and the left side. And if you see, I have written the caption here in blue and I have written the caption here in red. The blue color indicates that the right side of the heart deals with deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood. That is what will be seen in both the chambers on the right side, whereas the left side of the heart deals with the oxygenated blood. And we have already seen that the septa do not allow the mixing of the two types of blood. So now, what are the blood vessels that the right side of the heart? So first we will take up right auricle. Now, as we have already seen, the auricles are the receiving chambers. So, the right auricle is going to receive deoxygenated blood brought by two main veins, namely the superior vena cava the inferior vena cava and the coronary sinus. So the right auricle receives deoxygenated blood brought by two large veins, the superior vena cava, which is formed by a union of many veins from the anterior parts of the body. The inferior vena cava, a large vein which is formed by the union of many veins from the lower parts of the body or the posterior parts of the body. Both these major veins come and pour the deoxygenated blood into the right auricle. The right auricle also receives the deoxygenated blood brought from the walls of the heart by this vein called as the coronary sinus. So, the right auricle receives the deoxygenated blood. From the right auricle, the deoxygenated blood is pushed into the right ventricle. Now, in the right ventricle, arising from the right ventricle, there is a single blood vessel which is called as the pulmonary artery. Arising from the right ventricle, you have a single blood vessel which is called as a pulmonary artery. Now, as I told you, all arteries carry oxygenated blood with the exception of the pulmonary artery. Now you know the reason as to why the pulmonary artery is an exception, because it is arising in the right ventricle. What does the right ventricle deal with? It receives the deoxygenated blood from the right auricle. So the pulmonary artery carries the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle into the two lungs where oxygenation takes place. So that is why the pulmonary artery is an exemption, because it carries deoxygenated blood as opposed to all other arteries which carry oxygenated blood. So the pulmonary artery arises from the right ventricle and it divides into two branches, entering into the two lungs where the carbon dioxide is sent out and oxygen diffuses back into the bloodstream. So these are the blood vessels that remain connected to the right side of the heart, which deals with deoxygenated blood. Now, coming to the left side. The left side of the heart, so first we will look at the left auricle. The left auricle, as we said, the auricles are receiving chambers or they are collecting chambers. We know how the right auricle receives its blood. What are the veins that bring the blood there? Now coming to the left auricle receives oxygenated blood brought from the lungs by 4 pulmonary veins. 4 pulmonary veins. 2 from each heart. 2 from each lung. So, once the process of oxygenation is completed in the lungs, all the capillaries join to form 4 pulmonary veins, 2 from each lungs, and all the 4 pulmonary veins bring the oxygenated blood into the left auricle. Once again, let me draw your attention to the exemption. All the veins carry deoxygenated blood with the exception of the pulmonary veins. Why? The pulmonary veins are bringing the oxygenated blood or blood rich in oxygen from the lungs into the left auricle. So the left auricle receives oxygenated blood brought by 4 pulmonary veins from the lungs into the left auricle. Now, let us look into the blood vessel connected with the left ventricle. Arising from the left ventricle is a single largest blood vessel in the body, which is called as the aorta. The aorta is a single large artery that arises from the left ventricle, transporting blood rich with oxygen or oxygenated blood. This aorta arises from the left ventricle, forms a aortic arch from wherein it gives branches to all parts of the body, distributing the oxygenated blood. So, if you look at the left side of the heart, the left auricle receives oxygenated blood brought by 4 pulmonary veins. The left ventricle, from the left ventricle arises the single largest blood vessel in the body, namely the aorta, which carries and distributes oxygenated blood to various parts of the body. When we saw the internal structure of the heart, we did learn that there are 2 valves, the tricuspid and the bicuspid valve, present between the auricles and ventricles. Now let us recap that quickly and go on to see what are the 2 other valves that are present in the heart. The first one is the tricuspid valve. That is present between the right auricle and the right ventricle. The second one was the bicuspid valve. Between the left auricle and the left ventricle. We have already seen that these 2 valves will allow the blood to always move from the right auricle into the right ventricle or from the left auricle into the left ventricle. Now, apart from this, there are 2 more valves that are present in the heart, which are commonly referred to as the semilunar valves. The semilunar valves are 2 in number. 1 at the base of the pulmonary artery. Now we know that the pulmonary artery arises from the right ventricle. So, in order to allow for the movement of the blood from the ventricle into the blood vessel and not backwards, at the base of the pulmonary artery, you have the semilunar valve. Another semilunar valve that is present is at the base of the aorta. This is also referred to as the aortic valve. Now these 2 valves are important because they ensure that from the ventricles, they push the blood into the blood vessel and does not allow the backflow of blood back into the ventricles. So these are the semilunar valves that are present in the heart. So if you take the human heart, there are 4 valves. The tricuspid valve between right auricle and right ventricle, the bicuspid valve between the left auricle and left ventricle, the semilunar valves, one which is present at the base of the pulmonary artery, this will be in the right ventricle, and at the base of the aorta, which will be in the left ventricle. All these valves allow the flow of blood in one particular direction, preventing the backflow of blood. Now that we have got a clear understanding about the internal structure of the heart, in the next session, we will take up for study the types of circulation in man. Namaste and thank you.